Hi, I'm Mr. Norden, and I am going to be reading chapter 6 and 7 of Because of Winn, Dixie. Chapter 6. I spent a lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big, fancy place, but it's not. Just a little old house full of books. And Miss Franny Block is in charge of them all. She is a very small, very old woman with short gray hair. She was the first friend I made in Naomi. It all started with Winn Dixie not liking it when I went into the library because he couldn't go inside too. But I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and look out in the window and see me in there, selecting my books. And he was okay as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Franny Block saw Winn Dixie standing up on his hind legs like that, looking in the window, she didn't think he was a dog. She thought he was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books, kind of humming to myself, and all of a sudden, there was a loud and scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block, sitting on the floor behind her desk. "Miss Franny," I said, "are you all right?" "A bear," she said. "A bear?" I asked. "He's come back," she said. "He has?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Out there," she said, and raised a finger and pointed at Winn Dixie, standing up on his hind legs, looking in the window for me. "Miss Franny Block," I said, "that's not a bear. That's a dog. That's my dog, Winn Dixie." "Are you positive?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "I'm positive. He's my dog. I would know him anywhere." Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. "Come on," I said. "Let me help you up." "It's okay." I stuck out my hand, and Miss Franny took hold of it. I pulled her up off the floor. She didn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying how I must think she was a silly old lady, mistaking a dog for a bear, and that she had a bad experience with a bear coming into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she never had quite gotten over it. "When did that happen?" I asked her. "Well," said Miss Franny, "it is a very long story." "That's okay," I told her. "I'm like my mama in that I like to be told stories. But before you start telling it, can Winn Dixie come inside and listen too? He gets lonely without me." "Well, I don't know," said Miss Franny. "Dogs are not allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library." "Well, he'll be good," I told her. "He's a dog who goes to church." And before she could say yes or no, I went outside and got Winn Dixie. He came in and laid down with a humph and a sigh, right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him and said, "He most certainly is a large dog." "Yes, ma'am," I told her, "and he has a large heart, too." "Well," Miss Franny said. She bent over and gave Winn Dixie a pat on the head. And Winn Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffled his nose on her little old feet. "Let me get a chair and sit down so I can tell this story properly." Chapter 7. Back when Florida was wild, when it consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big they could fly away with you, Miss Franny Block started in, and I was just a little girl no bigger than you. My father, Herman W. Block, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday. Anything at all. Miss Franny looked around the library. She leaned in close to me. I don't want to appear prideful, she said, but my daddy was a very rich man. Very rich man. She nodded. And then she leaned back and said, and I was a little girl who loved to read. So I told him, I said, Daddy would most certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful. You asked for a whole library? A small one, Miss Franny nodded. I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share them too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, the very one we're sitting in now. And at a very young age, I became a librarian. Yes, ma'am. What about the bear? I said. Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days? Miss Franny Block said. Uh-huh, you did. It was wild. There were wild men, wild women, wild animals like bears. Yes, ma'am, that's right. Now I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-It-All. I was a Miss Smarty Pants with all my library full of books. Oh, yes, ma'am, I thought I knew the answers to everything. Well, one hot Thursday, I was sitting in the library with all the doors and windows open and my nose stuck in a book when a shadow crossed across my desk. Without looking up, yes, ma'am, without even looking up, I said, Is there a book I can help you with? Well, there was no answer. And I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman scared of these all books and afraid to speaking up. But then I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a very strong smell. I raised my eyes slowly. Standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear. How big? I asked. Oh, well, said Miss Franny, perhaps 3 times the size of your dog. Then what happened? I asked her. Well, said Miss Franny, I looked at him. He looked at me, put his big nose up in the air, and sniffed as if he were trying to decide if a little Miss Know-It-All librarian was what he was in the mood to eat. And I sat there. And then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I am not going to let that happen without a fight. No, ma'am. So very slowly and very carefully, I raised up my book I was reading. What book was it? I asked. Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book. I raised it up slowly. I was taking aim carefully, and I threw it right at the bear and screamed, "Be gone!" And do you know what? No, ma'am, I said. He went. But this is what I will never forget. He took the book with him. No, I said. Yes, ma'am, said Miss Franny. He snatched it up and ran. Did he come back? I asked. No, I never saw him again. Well, the men in town used to tease me about it. They used to say, Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book. He said he sure was good, and it would be all right if he kept it just for another week. Yes, ma'am, they did tease me about it, she sighed. I imagine I'm the only one left from those days. I imagine I'm the only one who even recalls that bear. All my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they're all dead and gone. She sighed again. She looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes being friendless in a new town and not having Mama to comfort me. I sighed too. When Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny, he sat up and then showed Miss Franny his teeth. "Well, now look at that," she said. "Dog is smiling at me." "It's a talent of his," I told her. "It's a fine talent," Miss Franny said. "A very fine talent." She smiled back at Winn Dixie. "We could be friends," I said to Miss Franny. "I mean, you and me and Winn Dixie. We could all be friends." Miss Franny smiled even bigger. "Why, that would be grand," she said, "just grand." And right at that minute, right when the three of us had just decided to be friends, who should come marching into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library but old pinched-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Franny's desk and said, "I finished Johnny Tremaine, and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult now because I am an advanced reader." "Yes, dear, I know," said Miss Franny. She got up out of her chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't even there. She stared right past me. "Are dogs allowed in the library?" she asked Miss Franny as they walked away. "Certain ones," said Miss Franny, "a select few." And then she turned around and winked at me. I smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and nobody was going to mess that up for me, not even old pinched face Amanda Wilkinson. Thank you.